Manhunt. Released by Rockstar Games in 2003, Manhunt wasn't just controversial, it was branded as a manual for murder. The game follows James Earl Cash, a death row inmate who's supposed to be executed, but instead wakes up in an abandoned city called Carcer City. He's forced to participate in brutal snuff films, directed by a mysterious figure known as the Director. Players must execute enemies using plastic bags, baseball bats, glass shards, and wire, all while being filmed by security cameras. The game rewards players with better ratings for more creative and prolonged kills, with execution animations that last up to 30 seconds of graphic violence. New Zealand banned it outright, calling it instructional violence that could teach real murder techniques. Germany prohibited it for sadistic content that violated their strict violence guidelines. The UK withdrew it from stores after the 2004 murder of Stefan Pakira, whose parents blamed the game despite police finding no evidence of connection. The controversy was so intense that even some game stores refused to sell it voluntarily. The game's director-style gameplay, where players literally earn higher scores for more creative kills, crossed every line censors had drawn and set the precedent for extreme violence debates. Postal 2, Running with Scissors, created what they called the most controversial game ever made, and they weren't wrong. Postal 2 drops players into the fictional town of Paradise, Arizona, playing as the postal dude during what starts as a mundane week of errands. You need to get milk, return a library book, pick up a paycheck, simple tasks that inevitably spiral into absolute chaos. The game's tagline was, "It's only as violent as you are." But the options for violence were staggering. You can urinate on people to make them vomit, set them on fire and watch them scream, decapitate them with a shovel, or use cats as gun silencers. Yes, actual cats. The game includes napalm, anthrax, and weapons like the GIMP suit for melee combat. Australia and New Zealand banned it for gross, abhorrent content, with the Australian Classification Board calling it revolting and depraved. Sweden restricted its sale to adults only, while Germany heavily censored it. The game's open-world design meant players could theoretically choose peaceful solutions, but the marketing focused entirely on the violent possibilities, showing trailers of people being set on fire and decapitated. The controversy was so intense that the developers embraced it, releasing expansion packs with even more extreme content and making the banned status part of their marketing strategy. Grand Theft Auto series. Rockstar's crime empire has been banned more times than any other franchise, and for good reason. The series glorifies criminal behavior, rewarding players for theft, murder, and mayhem. In Thailand, GTA 4 was banned after an 18-year-old named Paul Wat Chino killed a taxi driver with a knife, allegedly inspired by the game's carjacking mechanics. Thai authorities pulled it from stores immediately and banned future imports. Brazil banned GTA San Andreas when hackers discovered the Hot Coffee mod, which revealed hidden sexual content that could be unlocked with simple code modifications. The mod showed the main character having graphic sexual encounters, causing a massive scandal that led to the game's M rating being changed to adults only. Australia has consistently edited or banned GTA games throughout the series, removing references to sexual violence, drug use, and extreme criminal behavior. GTA Vice City was banned in Haiti for its negative portrayal of Haitians, while several countries censored the ability to kill police officers and civilians. The series' core concept, rewarding players for criminal behavior in realistic urban environments, has made it a permanent target for moral panic and government censorship worldwide. Each new release faces scrutiny from parent groups, politicians, and censorship boards who see it as training simulator for real-world crime. Wolfenstein 3D. id Software's shooter pioneer faced an obvious problem in Germany. It featured Nazi imagery, swastikas, and Adolf Hitler as the final boss named Stadtmeister. Players fight through Castle Wolfenstein, gunning down Nazi soldiers and SS officers while Nazi symbols cover every wall. Germany's strict post-war laws prohibiting Nazi symbols meant an instant ban under their criminal code. The game's first-person perspective was revolutionary for 1992, but its historical setting created legal complications that persist today. The German version, called Wolfenstein 3D: The Censor's Cut, removed all Nazi references, changing enemies to aliens and Hitler to a generic robot boss. Even modern Wolfenstein games face the same issues. Wolfenstein, The New Order, was heavily censored in Germany, with Nazi symbols replaced with generic triangles and storylines altered to remove historical references. The irony wasn't lost on developers that a game about fighting Nazis was banned in the country that most opposed them. This created a precedent where historical accuracy became secondary to political sensitivity, affecting how World War II games are developed and distributed globally. Doom, another id Software creation. Doom sparked the first major video game moral panic that would define censorship debates for decades. Brazil banned it outright, while Germany restricted it as harmful to youth under their youth protection laws. The game's satanic imagery, graphic violence, and first-person perspective terrified parents and politicians worldwide. Players battle through hell itself, fighting demons with shotguns and chainsaws, while heavy metal music blares. The graphics were groundbreaking for 1993, showing pixelated blood splatter and dismembered bodies in unprecedented detail. Religious groups condemned it as promoting Satanism, while psychologists worried about its psychological effects on young players. The controversy exploded globally when the Columbine shooters Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris were revealed to be obsessive Doom players who had created custom levels. Politicians and media blamed the game for training the killers. Despite no scientific evidence supporting this claim, the game's technical innovation, including networked multiplayer and user-created content, was overshadowed by fears it was literally training a generation of killers. This led to worldwide censorship debates that continue today, with Doom becoming the poster child for violent video game concerns and establishing the template for future moral panics. Mortal Kombat, Midway's fighting game, didn't just get banned. It created the entire video game rating system that exists today. The game's fatalities, finishing moves where characters rip out hearts, tear off heads, freeze opponents and shatter them, or burn them alive, were unlike anything seen in arcade games before. Sub-Zero's spine-ripping fatality became iconic, while Scorpion's "Get Over Here," followed by "Immolation," shocked players worldwide. Australia banned it immediately, Germany censored all blood and fatalities, and Japan removed the blood entirely, turning it into a bizarre, bloodless fighting game. The controversy reached the U.S. Congress in 1993, leading to Senate hearings where politicians played the game live on C-SPAN while expressing horror at its content. Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl led the charge, calling it nightmarish and morally reprehensible. The hearings led directly to the creation of the ESRB rating system in 1994, fundamentally changing how games are regulated worldwide. The game's success proved that controversy could drive sales. The more politicians condemned it, the more kids wanted to play it. Mortal Kombat literally changed how games are regulated, marketed, and perceived by society, making it one of the most culturally significant banned games in history. Pokémon Go, Niantic's augmented reality phenomenon, faced unique bans having nothing to do with violence or content. It was banned for existing in the real world. The game used GPS technology to place virtual Pokémon in real locations, requiring players to physically walk to parks, landmarks, and buildings to catch them. Iran banned it immediately over GPS espionage fears, with authorities claiming the game was secretly mapping their country for foreign intelligence agencies. The Iranian government worried that players were unknowingly collecting geographic data on military installations, government buildings, and sensitive infrastructure. Saudi Arabia's religious authorities called it un-Islamic and dangerous to society, claiming it promoted gambling through its random reward systems and distracted Muslims from prayer. The game's use of evolution, even fictional creature evolution, conflicted with strict religious interpretations. Egypt restricted it near government buildings and military zones, fearing security breaches as players gathered in sensitive areas. Russia investigated it for potential espionage, while several countries banned it from government facilities entirely. The game's real-world integration created unprecedented censorship challenges that had nothing to do with traditional content concerns. Governments weren't just banning fictional content, they were banning reality itself, treating a children's game as a potential national security threat. The controversy highlighted how modern technology could create entirely new categories of censorship. Command and Conquer: Generals. EA's real-time strategy game depicted a fictional World War III scenario that proved too realistic for comfort. The game featured 3 playable factions: the United States, China, and a terrorist organization called the Global Liberation Army. Players could control Chinese forces equipped with nuclear weapons, battling across recognizable real-world locations, including major cities. The campaign mode included a mission where Beijing gets devastated by a nuclear attack, showing China's capital in ruins, with radiation effects and civilian casualties. Chinese authorities banned it immediately upon discovering this content, deeming the portrayal of their military and the destruction of their capital city as unacceptable and offensive to national dignity. The game also featured stereotypical portrayals of Chinese military tactics and technology that officials found insulting. Beyond the nuclear destruction, the game included controversial elements like suicide bombers, anthrax attacks, and chemical weapons, all presented in a relatively realistic military context. The ban wasn't about violence or morality in the traditional sense, it was pure political sensitivity and national pride. Chinese officials saw it as Western propaganda that portrayed their nation as weak and vulnerable to attack. This highlighted how geopolitical content could be just as controversial as graphic violence, with governments treating fictional military scenarios as potential threats to national image and security. Football Manager 2005. The most mundane banned game in history proves that even spreadsheets can be controversial. Sports Interactive's soccer simulation was banned in China for one seemingly innocent database entry. It listed Taiwan and Tibet as independent countries in the game's national team selection screen. Players could manage these teams in international competitions, treating them as sovereign nations rather than Chinese territories. This violated China's core political principle of One China, which considers Taiwan a renegade province and Tibet an autonomous region, not independent countries. The game included detailed player databases, league systems, and international tournaments for both regions, essentially creating a virtual world where China's territorial claims were ignored. Chinese authorities didn't just ban the game, they banned all future Sports Interactive products and pressured distributors to remove existing copies from stores. The controversy extended beyond gaming when the publisher refused to change the database, stating they reflected real-world football associations rather than political boundaries. This created a standoff between gaming companies and government censors over something as simple as a drop-down menu. The ban showed how even the most innocent games could cross political red lines, with a sports management simulation becoming a flashpoint for international relations. It remains probably the only game ever banned for its player database rather than its content. South Park: The Stick of Truth. Obsidian Entertainment's RPG captured the TV show's shock humor perfectly, perhaps too perfectly for global audiences. The game follows the new kid as they join Cartman's fantasy role-playing game, encountering the same crude humor and controversial topics that made the show famous. The most problematic scene involved a minigame where players perform an abortion on Randy Marsh, complete with graphic visuals and sound effects that pushed boundaries even for South Park standards. Australia's classification board banned it outright, calling the abortion sequence revolting and unjustifiable. European versions were censored to remove multiple scenes, including Nazi zombie sequences, alien abduction scenes with probing, and religious extremism content featuring Jesus and Satan. The game's satirical take on controversial topics like homosexuality, racism, and religious fundamentalism was deemed too extreme for many regions. Players could encounter everything from underpants gnomes to Al Gore as a boss battle, with each scenario designed to offend someone. The controversy was complicated by the fact that it was clearly parody. The same content that aired on television was banned in game form. Regulators struggled to distinguish between South Park's established satirical voice and genuinely offensive content, leading to inconsistent bans across different countries. The game proved that even well-established comedy franchises couldn't escape censorship when translated to interactive media. Death Stranding. Hideo Kojima's surreal delivery simulator was banned in Saudi Arabia for reasons that highlight the unpredictable nature of modern censorship. The game follows Sam Porter Bridges as he reconnects a fractured America after a supernatural apocalypse called the Death Stranding. Players traverse a post-apocalyptic landscape delivering packages while avoiding ghostly creatures called BTs and dealing with themes of death, rebirth, and human connection. The game's abstract narrative includes references to the afterlife, supernatural phenomena, and existential questions about death and consciousness that apparently conflicted with Saudi Arabia's strict media guidelines. The portrayal of a devastated America, complete with destroyed cities and a collapsed government, may have been seen as politically sensitive or inappropriate. Additionally, the game's themes of isolation, depression, and suicide, central to the protagonist's journey, didn't align with approved content standards. The game includes scenes of characters discussing death, showing corpses, and dealing with grief in ways that Saudi censors found unacceptable. What makes this ban particularly notable is that Death Stranding is fundamentally nonviolent. It's about building connections and delivering hope, not fighting enemies. The ban highlighted how even artistic philosophical games could fall victim to broad censorship policies when their themes touched on sensitive cultural or religious topics. The Last of Us, Part 2, Naughty Dog's zombie apocalypse sequel, was banned across multiple Middle Eastern countries, but not for its graphic violence or zombie content. It was banned for its progressive representation and social themes. The game features Ellie, a lesbian protagonist in a relationship with her girlfriend Dina, with their romance being central to the story. Additionally, the game includes Lev, a transgender character whose storyline involves rejection by a religious cult and acceptance by the main characters. These LGBTQ+ themes were deemed unacceptable in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and other conservative regions, where such content violates local laws and cultural values. The game's graphic violence, including brutal combat sequences, torture scenes, and disturbing infected creatures, was actually less problematic than its representation of non-traditional relationships. The ban highlighted a growing trend where games face censorship, not for violence but for social progress and inclusive storytelling. The game also deals with themes of revenge, religious extremism, and moral ambiguity in ways that some authorities found uncomfortable. Ironically, the same regions that banned it for LGBTQ+ content had no problem with far more violent games, showing how cultural sensitivity often trumps content-based concerns. The ban proved that representation could be more controversial than any amount of blood and gore, with progressive storytelling clashing directly with traditional values in ways that made compromise impossible. Spec Ops, The Line. Jaeger development created a psychological critique of modern warfare that got banned not for its anti-war message, but for its setting. The game follows Captain Martin Walker and his Delta Force team as they investigate a distress signal from Dubai after a catastrophic sandstorm has buried the city. The UAE banned it immediately because it portrayed their gleaming metropolis as a war-torn wasteland, filled with refugees, military checkpoints, and civilian casualties. The game's depiction of Dubai's luxury hotels as refugee camps, its skyscrapers as sniper nests, and its wealthy districts as battlegrounds was seen as an insult to the city's carefully cultivated image. The game includes scenes of Dubai's landmarks destroyed or repurposed for military use, showing the Burj Khalifa damaged and the city's pristine image completely shattered. UAE authorities weren't concerned with the game's actual message, a sophisticated critique of American military intervention and the psychological toll of warfare. They ignored the game's condemnation of violence and its portrayal of soldiers suffering PTSD and moral breakdown. Instead, they focused solely on the setting, treating the fictional destruction of their city as unacceptable regardless of context. The ban proved that location could be more controversial than content, with governments more concerned about their image than the actual themes being explored. This created a precedent where games could be banned simply for using real locations in negative contexts. Outlast 2, Red Barrel's psychological horror game, pushed the boundaries of sexual violence and religious themes too far for multiple classification boards. The game follows Blake Langerman, a journalist investigating the murder of a pregnant woman in rural Arizona who becomes trapped in a nightmare involving a religious cult. The most controversial content involved implied sexual assault scenes, including a sequence where the protagonist appears to be violated by cult members, and disturbing religious imagery that depicted Christianity in extremely negative ways. Australia's classification board initially refused to rate it, effectively banning it for scenes they deemed too graphic and disturbing for any audience. The board specifically cited implied sexual violence that they felt crossed the line from horror into exploitation. The game includes scenes of religious extremism, child abuse, and torture that were presented in extremely graphic detail. After significant editing that removed the most problematic sexual content, the game received an R18+ rating in Australia, but the original version remains prohibited. The controversy highlighted ongoing debates about horror content boundaries and what constitutes acceptable fictional violence versus exploitation. The game's use of religious imagery, including perverted Christian symbolism and blasphemous scenes, also contributed to its problems with censors. The ban demonstrated how sexual violence remains a harder line for censors than regular violence, even in clearly fictional horror contexts.